Hi, I'm Mark Unger, producer of Roundtable. Because we find this presentation so special, we really would like for you to see this. Please watch.
Good evening. Welcome to Single Shot at Manhattan Neighborhood Networks Roundtable. Tonight we will be talking about the breaking points. Every artist who creates art believes that he's doing something beautiful and something worth recognition, and only selected few actually are reaching this point. And tonight we have in our studio Hank ONeal, a person who didn't just reach this point, who reached it at grand. If I would be citing the achievements of Hank, that probably will take me longer than the whole episode. He published numerous books, photographed some pretty beautiful individuals, and created a lot of stories, and basically defined what we call photography today in many ways. And what I wanted to ask Hank is how it feels to realize that you're actually part of photographic past, present, and future permanently. Hello, Hank, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Alex.
I'm really thrilled and honored. So,
it's nice to be here, and I don't know whether I'm past, present, and future. I don't really think about it. I think about it as, you know, it's today. And what am I going to do today and what I'm going to do tomorrow, and I don't think a lot about what I did yesterday. Unless somebody wants to buy a picture or something, then I have to go find what I did yesterday and put it together. But it's been an interesting journey. The first picture that I count as a real picture is from 1953, when I was 13 years old with a little brownie. And it just worked out. I mean, I didn't know anything. I was 13 years old. And the most recent picture was Monday of this week. And it's okay too. So, and in between there have been many others. And so, but maybe at some point I'll think about it from that standpoint. From part of a continuum and part of history or whatever. But I never really have very much. I feel that if you have something that you are thinking about that you want to do tomorrow, that's a interesting project, or where you might get an interesting photograph or something, that's what you keep thinking about. And then late at night at 1:30 in the morning or something, and it's all dark and quiet, then you can say, that thing I did in 1975, maybe I should revisit that and think about that for something. But I don't, when I'm actually actively working, I don't think too much about the past.
Oh, so you're one of the masters who's focusing on the moment and just abstract himself from the rest of the universe besides this particular object in front of the lens.
Yeah.
Oh, that's,
so
in my opinion, the best approach. That's how you create the most compelling story.
So that's what I try to do.
But if I would look at your photographic history, was there any point when you realized that I'm not just good, but I accept it to be good? I know that everybody knows that I'm a good photographer.
The interesting thing is, I got into taking photographs. I mean, I always had as a child. Mm-hmm. I won a camera when I was very young, and I took pictures. My father had taken pictures in the 1930s and in the 1940s. He even had a dark room, and I got to watch him do it. But that wasn't a great big influence on me. I think that the first real influence was necessity, because in the late 1960s, I started a record company. Mm-hmm. And in those days, you know, they were LPs, they were very large, and they had pictures on them, on the front or on the back or whatever. And I was very poor, and I was the cheapest photographer I could find. So I taught myself how to do that. I got a little Pentax 35 millimeter camera in about 1967 or 68, and I've never had a formal lesson from. I mean, one time Bernice Abbott decided she wanted to show me how to use an 8x10 camera, and I got one and went to see her. And the formal lesson of working with Bernice lasted about half an hour. She had a yellow pad, she drew a lens on it, said the light comes in here and it comes out over here. It says, that's enough of that, let's go take a picture. And I've never,
compelling,
I mean, I've never really read a how-to book or anything, and most everything has come from experimentation or having to do something by necessity. To take the, I couldn't afford to hire a photographer to take the picture to go on the front of a record or the back of a record, so I did it myself. And in the early 70s, 1972, I met a fellow named Bert Stern, who was a fine photographer, and through a whole series of circumstances far too complicated to relate, Bert wound up giving me a Rolleiflex. So I had a medium format camera. I now had 3 cameras. I had that little Pentax, which was had a little 50 millimeter lens on it or something. I had a 2.8 Rollie, and I had an SX70, a Polaroid SX70. And so the Rolleiflex, having a square format, was ideal for taking a photograph of somebody for a square format record.
Naturally.
And so I did that. And in 1972, late 72, I visited Bernice Abbott at her, I had met her in the summer, but I visited her in Maine, and I bought a picture from her. And she said, yeah, you can buy that picture. It's $100 cash. And I said, yes, ma'am. It was an Atche photograph. And she says, but I've got to fix it for you. And I said, what do you mean? She says, well, I've got to flatten it, I've got to put it on a board, and I've got to spot it. So she went out on her back porch and she was spotting it. And I said, Miss Abbott, can I take a picture of you spotting my picture? And she says, what do you got? And I said, I have an SX70. And she says, what's that? And I showed her, and she looked at it, and she says, that's a goddamn toy. And I said, no, it's a very good camera. And that Walker Evans uses this and so forth. She says, well, go ahead, see what happens. Took a picture of her spotting this picture. And I had a bad batch of film. The film that popped out of the camera had spots all over it. And so did the second one and the third one. So I pulled it out, put in a new film pack, and finally got a good picture. And she finished the picture. Then I had to go back to New York. She walked me out to the car, and she said, among a lot of other things, but one thing that she said was, you seem like an okay guy. Says, if you ever get a real camera, come up here and I'll show you how to use it. Which a real camera to her meant an 8x10. So a few months later, I bought one and took her up on it, and went to Maine the following summer with my big camera, and that's when I had the 20-minute lesson. But then went out with her, and we took pictures and set things up and did all sorts of things. But it was by necessity and just learning it as you went along. That's exactly the same way that I taught myself how to be an audio engineer. I did not go to school to do that. I mean, I started a school to teach other people how to do it, but I taught myself. And the same thing with the photography. It was something I had to do to work in with another project.
So there was no real moment when you remember saying to yourself, I don't need to prove myself in this
Well, the funny thing is,
industry.
The first photographic project that I ever undertook,
Huh?
other than taking a picture of a guy with a saxophone in the recording studio, was in East Texas of a tiny town in about 1971, 72, and I made a bunch of pictures, and they were in the first show I ever had in Soho. This would have been about 1973, and I mean it was so low level. I made all the frames myself, and there were, I think, 20 pictures or something. I still have them. I was so green that I made 8x10 prints, and I put them on mat board with rubber cement. I didn't even have a dry or anything. I still have them, and they've all turned funny colors and stuff. But this was the first show, and then about 10 or 12 years ago, I gathered up all of these old black and white East Texas photographs and made a little handmade book. There's a company called Blurb where you can make a little book. And I made 2 or 3 copies because I wanted to give one to the mayor of the town that I had taken. Now, he's not even the mayor, it's the councilman or something. And I had a second copy that I think I gave to Howard Greenberg. But anyway, to make a long story short, these were the first ones. And 2 years ago, in 2016, I was in Germany working at Steidl, putting together a book about Bernice Abbott and her Paris portraits, and my other book that just came out from Steidl. And somehow, and I don't know how he did it, Gearheart Steidl, who has a pretty good eye for making books and stuff, had a copy of this little handmade book that I had done about these 1972 photographs in East Texas. They're very real. They're rural, small town America. And he looked at it and he says, "These are very good. I'd like to do this." And I didn't even know how he got the book because I didn't give it to him. Now, maybe Howard did because Howard and Gearheart had done projects together. But and then I took another copy up to Howard and showed him and told him what Gearheart had said, and he said, "Yeah, nobody understands Walker Evans like you do." And I said, "Well, that's a nice thing to say." And I said, "Well, why don't you write something about that to go in the book?" And he said, "Okay." So at some point we'll do that. We haven't yet, but that's when I don't know that I really realized, but I knew that I'm not Ansel Adams or Steichen or anything like that, but I'm reasonably good. I had an old friend of Bernice Abbot's was named Juno Barnes. She was a really marvelous writer, and she used to say of herself that I'm in the first row of the second rate. And so, in the first row, you have Robert Frank or Ansel Adams or whoever. I'm back there somewhere else. So, but they're pretty good, and so that's.
Oh, it's actually interesting. I thought that you had this realization much earlier than relatively recently.
I didn't. I didn't think about it. I just kept doing. I think sometimes if you think about things too hard, you'll just keep thinking about things instead of doing things.
Well, that's for sure.
And because you take a picture and one person will think it's marvelous and another person will think it's silly. And the musicians that I've worked with, the best ones don't read reviews. They don't care what anybody else says. They know what they're doing. A wonderful photographer who was part of the project that I worked on in the 70s about the Farm Security Administration was a man named John Vachon. He wound up working at Look magazine, marvelous photographer. And John said that he went out and photographed whatever it was that fascinated his eye, and he didn't worry about it. He just, if he saw something that was wonderful, he took a picture of it. And that's sort of what I've been doing for a long time, is if I see something that I think is interesting and amazing, I'll take a picture of it and try to fit it into a project or get a project and see how it evolves. And sometimes you have a good idea for something and you don't follow through, you don't finish it. I remember we tried one in Bernice Abbott and I were going to do one for fun in Maine. And it was at a time when a lot of people were doing minimal kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
So Bernice and I hooked up an idea that we were going to take some photographs. I was going to take some photographs of commonplace things like an electrical plug in an outlet, or weeds in the snow, or a couple of old boards on the side of a house or something. And very commonplace. The only ground rule was it had to be within 100 feet of her house in rural Maine, or in her house. And what we were going to do, we were going to print up perfect prints, and we were going to frame them and mount them and make them beautiful and everything. And then she was going to tell the photographic community, because she had found this incredible naive photographer in Maine who was making outstanding work at the end of the road in a log cabin, and he had to boil water to mix his chemicals and stuff like that because he didn't have any hot water. We took a bunch of pictures, but frankly, we didn't have enough time to do it. We were working on books or portfolios or something, but it was a cute idea. We just never pulled it off. It would have been fun to have, gotten somebody say, "Oh yes, these are incredible! Wow!" And it was just as a joke.
Oh.
So
I know that you usually walk in series. Basically, when you're going out, you're giving yourself an assignment.
Mm-hmm.
But before we started the show, you mentioned something very interesting about walks that didn't fit into the series. As I understand, you're preparing something pretty incredible on that.
Well, it's just. Bernice was a lady who was very influential. I mean, not so much as from the standpoint of how to take a picture or anything, but how to think about things and what to look for. And she was a really good friend. We've so far gotten, I think, 9 or 10 books about her done. So most of her great photographs are already in good book form, mostly all from Gearhart's title, and they look quite wonderful. But Bernice used to admonish me to always have a project and not just go out and take random pictures. And what she used to say was, don't take pictures willy-nilly. Just put, do your musicians or do your street art or do whatever you want to do. But don't just go out and snap, snap, snap. She hated shutterbugs. She used to call them shutterbugs. Terrible people. And so the other day I was thinking about all the photographs that I had that didn't really fit, because I'm 109. I mean, I've been taking pictures a long time, and there's been things that don't fit into specific projects, because I'll be out doing something about Project X, and here's something wonderful turns up. I remember the other day I was out in Bushwick in Brooklyn, and I had been walking for 3 or 4 hours, and it was hot, and I was tired and whatnot. And I got to where the subway stop was on Morgan Avenue, and I look over at the subway entrance, and it's a very large subway entrance. And standing right in the middle of the entrance is a lady in a wedding gown with her groom and a couple of bridesmaids, and they've just gotten off the subway.
I was prepared to hear that they take informal photographs. That would be something.
They were taking the train. Either they were coming or, but they're standing right in front of where you go down this. Just the way the other people on the streets were, and a couple of dogs, and all. I mean, it was just chaos. And so, boom, and that doesn't really fit. Don't take wedding pictures. So here's this standalone picture when I was out doing something else. And so what I was thinking about was that Bernice said, don't take pictures willy-nilly. Well, I've probably got maybe a couple of hundred over all these years that don't fit anywhere, but are pretty good. So I'm going to do a little book project, and it's going to be called Willie Nilly. And some of them have funny stories about them, the circumstances or whatever, how they came about. So that's...
I hope you would put the stories to accompany the pictures.
Well, I think that the stories are important. They're wonderful artists who just want to have it be a picture.
Indeed.
No commentary, no anything. If I take a picture of some wonderful 87-year-old jazz musician, and he looks like this or that, sometimes there's a story behind that about how it worked out, or why did I take these pictures in Highgate, or what does this look like? Why am I doing this on a funny back road in East Texas? There's a story. Most all of them have a story. I remember, recently I was down there, and here was a bunch of Mexican guys. They had a stand along the side of the road where they were selling tamales, and it was really a beautiful stand. They had done a great thing, and the stuff was really, really good, and they were really, really nice people. And so I talked to them and this and that, but the entire stand had half a dozen or more Confederate flags flying around it, which is
this is now it gets interesting.
Because that makes it a little different, because there are many Hispanics in Texas, I guess, who are conservative, who like that kind of stuff.
Why not?
That's fine. It sure made for a good picture.
Indeed.
And they made good food. So
that's perfect.
what can you... So anyway,
combination of text and the picture becoming to be more and more a trend in modern art.
Yeah.
And in some situations, to some capacity, it actually becomes equally important. And from what he was telling me now, got me thinking that probably it's one of the forms of mixed media from now on.
Sure it is, because if a picture is worth 1,000 words, sometimes those words are fun to have next to the picture.
Yeah.
Sometimes
it might be worth 1,000 words, but in order to understand it completely, you need 1,010.
Yeah, I got a book the other day that was a wonderful book of portraits, and here's a picture of Henry Miller, and here's a picture of Bernice or something like that, with no captions. Now, I happen to recognize them, but maybe this person over there wouldn't. And I enjoy knowing who I'm looking at. I happen to, but if somebody that I don't know, I'd like to know that their name was Joe Smith, and I can go look up Joe Smith if it's a good photograph and find out what's going on with these people.
Wow.
So anyway.
Well, telling the story through the picture and telling the story through the caption, and you actually answered the other question I wanted to ask to a degree, but I still would probably like to confirm it. You was mentioning that correlation between understanding of the theory of photography, understanding technological part of it, but and having a vision. And that's what you mentioned in connection with Abbott. She wasn't teaching you that much of formal way of taking pictures, but was sharing with you her vision.
That's right. And how she did this and what she thought about and why she... Bernice was the kind of lady who would wait for the sun to get in the right place, and she'd stand there for half an hour or more, and she'd go scout a location, and make sure she came back at the right time to do it. I'm not quite that formal, but I do think about things like that, and when you're working exclusively with an 8x10 camera, it's a little different than if you're working with a 35 millimeter or a current digital camera.
It's only half photography. It's another half is meditation.
Yeah, and so I'm probably not the most technical person that you'll ever run into, from the standpoint of how a digital camera works and all the various tricks you can do with it and things like that. I'm just not very good at that. I'm better at seeing than I am at being technical, because, as I say, I'm totally self-taught, and because my interests have been so varied, I never had the leisure to pursue photography as much as I wanted to until the late 90s. I did it. I did it because it was an adjunct to my record business, to my festival production business, to the music events that I did and created, and occasionally on a book project. But it is not something that, I had that first show in 1973. I never had another real show until in 1999, Evelyn Dates at the Whitkin Gallery said, "Hank, you've got to put together a retrospective." So I did. And since that time, there have been lots, but I just never did it. I didn't, because I was too busy doing, it takes a long time. And so if I'd had the opportunity to just go out and take pictures or something, that would have been wonderful, but I wouldn't have made all those records. And I wouldn't have had all those festivals.
Correlation of technology and photography is a whole separate subject.
Yeah.
So we probably will need another episode to get
Good,
back to it.
good.
Thank you very much, Hank.
Thank you, Alex. It was
a huge
wonderful.
thrill. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. It was terrific.
I hope you found that worth watching as much as I did. I'm Mark Unger for Roundtable. Thanks for watching.